Okay, so today we have three artists on our panel, and they are all artists that have and do make art for art's sake, which means that the art itself is the final destination for them. But also, they have taken on creative ways of extending that creative energy out into the community and making more broad offerings to the community. So we're going to be looking at their work and listening to them about the projects that they're doing and the types of activities they're doing in the community as a service to the community, as well as just their private art practice. And so, first of all, I'm just going to show you an image from each of the artists of the art that they do for art's sake. And can everybody hear me pretty well? Okay, good. So this first piece is my piece of art. I get to go first today. And this is very private work. It addresses my Buddhist practices, and I don't care if anybody buys it. I just do it because it's important to me to express these experiences that I have in the Dharma. And so it's pretty esoteric in a way, you know. But anyway, that's the kind of work I do for myself.
This one.
Momentito.
Yeah, we're not advancing for some reason. Yeah. I'm going to reshare here. Hang on a sec. Okay.
So is it working on this?
I believe so, yeah. There you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is the private work that Zachary does, and to give you an idea of what kind of work that he does. And this is done in chalk?
This is chalk, yes. This is a chalk drawing on a blackboard. Yeah.
And so how big is this piece?
This one's 2 feet by 3 feet.
Okay.
It's a big one.
My piece was just like this big. I do kind of small stuff.
It's a big one.
And Joe, among other things, is a photographer, and this is one of his private pieces.
Yeah, I was kind of in a dark place when I took this. I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I think I was in withdrawal when I took this photo, so we'll just leave it at that.
Wow. I love it. Some of this work I'm seeing for the first time too, so I wanted to like surprise myself. Some of these guys are doing. Okay, so my project that I'm doing that's a community project is I helped found an artist housing project in Sacramento over 20 years ago. And so if you look at this picture here, this is actually the original school grounds of an old 1950 elementary school in North Sacramento. And the back part where the houses are, we bought about a third of the property from the school, the playground, and turned that into our artist housing project. And when we moved in there, part of our relationship with the school was we were hoping we could put together classes there, or maybe put a gallery space together or something like that. And over the years, the school has disintegrated, and we never did get to really fulfill that wish that we had when we moved into that location. And so about 2 years ago, some of us neighbors got together and we just said, we have to rescue this school because the neighborhood is a low-income neighborhood. The average income in our neighborhood, which is called the Dixie Ann neighborhood, which is a small neighborhood in Old North Sacramento, the average income is $17,000 a year. So people are really depressed there. And having the school that was vibrant for many years go into decline was destroying the neighborhood even further. So North Sacramento School was built in 1915 at a time when there was a lot of migration going on into Sacramento. And one of the main roads into Sacramento was Highway 40. Now I'm thinking, what, 40? The Lincoln Highway, and it came right through North Sacramento. And so tons of migration came through there. My family came to North Sacramento in 1928. Three generations drove out here on partially on the Lincoln Highway and settled there. I was born in North Sacramento myself, and then we all kind of like migrated out because as the neighborhood declined, it was redlined by the city, and a lot of terrible things happened to it. But the school was built as a promise to all the people migrating in that there would be good education for their children. This is an early photograph. It looks like it's probably from the 20s or something like that, quite early of the school. And you can see there's hardly anything built around it at that time. During 1941, the WPA came through and put in planters around the entire school and sidewalks and stuff. So there's a lot of history at this school. During the war, the kindergarten class, during World War II, we define what war it is. So in the 40s, the kindergarten class, I just found these photos and they're such treasures. It just shows some of the amazing morale building things that have gone on at that school through the years. So the kindergarten teacher classes, kindergarten teachers put together these huge plays for the kids to perform during the war. And you know, all these kids, their families are like their dads are probably all gone, you know, during the wars. And their moms are doing whatever they're doing, you know, with the hardships of the war. And so there's these wonderful photos. This one looks like they're dressed up like the rescue, you know, the nurses. Also, North Sacramento put together planes that during World War I, they put together planes. So there was a factory there that actually assembled planes at different times in North Sacramento. So that might be a reference. Plus, McClellan was a big draw. So a lot of military people moved into that area during the war. This was towards the end of the war. They did a big circus. Other types of activities happened at the school, bringing community together, and it was also a center for civic activities. The school has a stage room where you can do performances, and it's huge. So this is what the school looked like when we first moved into the property on the playground. And it looks really beautiful. It has all these heritage trees, and it was still being used as administration building. And we even held some meetings in there when we were planning our building project and stuff. Really beautiful. So it was an asset to the neighborhood. It's a huge building, big property. It's 2.5 acres still. So at one point, is this the movie? At one point, the school went in and cut down all the heritage trees that were on the property. And it went almost overnight, it went to looking like a vibrant building to like a corpse. I think that was where the movie was, but it doesn't look like a movie.
This one was?
That doesn't matter. So these are some photos.
No, this is.
Oh, this is it.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a little quick movie. How do I turn it on?
I think it should roll by. Sorry, we rehearsed this and it worked in rehearsal, guys.
This may be the end of it.
No, it's rolling.
There it
Yeah.
is. Okay.
Sound notes or sound?
Yeah, there's no sound to it. So this just shows, I just grabbed a bunch of Google map photos. I went back in time and pulled a bunch of photos from the same area to just show what happened to the degradation of the school over time and how, you know, it's like they'd planted all these trees, these flowering trees, and had outbuildings where there were actually still classes being held while we have been living behind there. Just through the seasons. These are all different years. And then this is what happened. In October of 2020, they cut all the trees down and they started tearing all the outbuildings out, and it just turned into a corpse. And then at some point around that time, they invited the homeless community to come in and move in without any oversight or anything like that. So it really just like went way down. So at that point, we're like, oh, this our little dream that was hanging out there, it's like, oh, this is terrible. And so they put the school on the market and somebody put a down payment on it. It was in escrow. And the small community association that I belong to, we said, let's just start treating the school like it belongs to us instead. And so we did some work. We got it put on the national, state, and city registry as a historic building. It was the first historic building designated in North Sacramento. This school is actually designed by the same person, Cecil Cuff, who designed the Guild Theater in Oak Park and the Greek Orthodox Church in Alhambra. And there's a Catholic church called St. Mary's that is all made out of marble and it looks like a lighthouse. He does all these sort of fantastic, romanticized, exotic buildings. And so we got that on there and that brought a lot of attention. It started showing up on the news, as being like a big deal. And okay. So this is the after. Anyway, this is a monument, or it's like a memorial out front because there's just like gang wars going out there and stuff. And so this is like for all the deaths. Since I've lived there, there've probably been 10 murders within 2 blocks of my house. It's like it's gone way downhill. So what we're doing is, here's the gist of it. We bought the building. The neighborhood put together this plan, worked all the city agencies, the city council, the board, the school board, and they agreed that they would sell us the building. And so we went out and we found a developer that was sympathetic to making dreams come true for downtrodden neighborhoods. And he came up with the money and he bought it. And so now we're in the process of activating it and getting it fixed up. And so I'm just going to read my mission statement and that's all I'm going to say after that. This is the inside. This shows what shape it's in now, but it shows it has this huge stage room, which is great. So our mission statement is Old North Sacramento Legacy Center, a creative town hall fostering the arts, community, business development, civic pride, and historic placemaking in the heart of North Sacramento, serving all District 2 neighborhoods. And our guiding principles are rebuilding cohesive community, provide a space where cultural diversity and its expression can thrive, uplifting community neighborhood confidence by combating years of disinvestment and lowered standards, addressing poverty of experience with inspirational programming and creative opportunities, supporting programs, development, and ordinances that benefit the diverse community and enhance aesthetics and higher standards, fostering local residential community self-determination through political power, maintain a safe and inspiring space for community. And so we are actually at the point where this is happening. So that's and it's going to be like a cultural, it's mostly like an artistic cultural community sort of center. And everything that's going to be done there is going to foster especially foster bringing all the diverse migratory groups that have settled there through the years, who have been like divided over funds and stuff. And we're going to try to bring them all together because the strength of the neighborhood is in all the cultural diversity. So that's mine, the thing I'm doing. Next.
Zach's up next.
I'm up next.
Okay.
Thank you, Kim.
Yeah.
Oh, my word. And thank you all for being so attentive. I have to say, I'm so grateful to be here to do this talk for you all. Thank you, Kim. I remember the first talk I came to was Jen's maybe 9 months ago. It's quite an honor to be here before you. I am a Waldorf teacher, so it's really interesting. I think arts, like I'm seeing kind of like a through line, another through line. We talked about a through line in all 3 of our presentations. And what I'm seeing, I've always considered myself kind of as a first responder of culture, as a teacher. And I'm starting to see just like all artists in that way, not just teachers. Like you're like a first responder for culture in the project you're doing, and I'm doing that as a Waldorf teacher. The Waldorf paradigm is not is an alternative It's not like I'm not a public school teacher, although I do play by all the public school rules. We're a charter school. So I still have to go through all of the hoops, all of the standardized testing. We still have a bell schedule and all of that. But I have this amazing freedom of being able to use art from the moment the children get there until the moment they leave. So I teach art to them. I'm not really speaking about Dharma today. I'm going to talk a little bit about like kind of like Waldorf Dharma, and you'll have to infer and figure out and how this applies. Recently Lama talked about this process of learning how to appear and disappear. He talks about it pretty frequently, how to learning how to breathe, basically, how to incarnate and excarnate. And that's really one of the Waldorf teacher's primary jobs, is that I am teaching the children how to breathe and how to self-regulate. And really, there's no greater way to do that than through art and movement and all of the yogas that we do in the morning. My students come in and they'll be silent for about 10 minutes doing some bell work, but then they get up and they move for about an hour and a half. And it's singing and dancing. I teach folk dancing. I teach, yoga. I teach yoga and they don't even know they're getting it. I teach paramitas and they don't even know that they're getting these virtues that they're getting from me. One of the other big takeaways as a Waldorf teacher is that my job is to help them learn how to make meaning out of their own lives. And of course, there's no other way to do that except through understanding art. I'm a storyteller primarily. That's what I do. I get them moving, we sing and we dance, we do art. But then when it comes down to it, I am a storyteller and I tell the world's stories to them. And the idea is that they're recapitulating, all of humanity's epochs. And we do that first grade all the way through eighth grade. We start with fairy tales and we move through fables and then the Torah and then the stories of the Norse myths and then Egypt and Persia and Greece, all of the foundational stories of Western civilization. And in that way, by the time they get out of eighth grade, they have this wealth of stories that they've been given. And not only the stories, but also like the art that goes with it. So here's an image from a first grade chalkboard. And the first graders learn their letters very much the way that humanity brought them out as pictograms. So they learn the letters first as images. Everything that they're given has a corresponding living image that goes with it, right? That's the Waldorf method. So here they've learned about D, the dragon. That was from the story St. George and the Dragon. And I told a story from Grimm's fairy tales. The bear skin was the name of that story, and that gave us the bear. There's more images of the bear. I tell a story, and it's usually like a 20-minute, 25-minute story that I don't read. It's one that I've memorized that I bring to the students so that they can see that it's a living story. And then they go to sleep. They take it into their dreams with them. And then the next day I start talking about the story and I start drawing. Pretty much all of what I lecture on basically is all on the chalkboard. So what you're seeing is like me showing them technique, how I did it, and they're also remembering the story. Like, oh, and here's a really great way to make a bear's ear. And we do that again and again and again. Here's a drawing that I put up. I have two kinds of drawings that I do for the students. I found that especially young children, if you put up something that's really, really stunning, really polished piece of work up on the chalkboard that took, 2.5 hours to do, they sit down and they're like, oh, I got to draw that? Oh my word. And it became kind of defeating. And so lots of times I'll have two drawings up. I'll have a drawing like this, to begin the school year, something like this, or I'll have a seasonal drawing up or a drawing that goes with the block. But then during the day, I'll do sketches and they get to see the process of like, oh, that's how my teacher was able to make that kind of a drawing. All of the stories we do math, we do science, we do history, everything has a living image. This was Beauty of Number, where we went through the 12 numbers and we gave them all kind of like a specific meaning. And then back in time a little bit, this was a first grade drawing. Right now in third grade, we're learning stories of the Torah, the Old Testament. And so stories of Joseph and Noah. And I just told the story of Sodom, which was really like, wow, I'm telling third graders the story of, wow. And they got it. They were like, wow, that's amazing. part of what happens, I have had students that leave the Waldorf classroom where they, for years and years, have been hearing stories that I've told to them directly, and they get to feel the impact of the story. And then they've gone to a public school and they actually encountered the same exact stories, but they were given in textbooks. Like, okay, here's the story of Hannibal crossing the Alps. Was the story that my students identified as like, oh, you told that story to us, and we totally got it. We understood the gravity of what was happening with Caesar and Hannibal coming over the Alps with his elephants, and it was snowy. And then the next year they were given a textbook. Here, read the story of Hannibal crossing the Alps and answer the questions at the end. And they could feel the difference between like a living story and just a textbook. So we do science, we do math, all of it. This was a quick drawing I did to explain what a yurt was. Somebody's like, wait, what's a yurt? It's like, this is a yurt. We study shelters in third grade as well. In fourth grade, we study animals. This was one of my big drawings that was meant to inspire them, not for them to like try to copy. This was one that they saw me do across several days. Human animal drawing. We do Norse myths in fourth grade. We do all of the myths. This is one way that we work with the separation of church and state. We teach all of the religions' mythologies and all of the great stories. So we are not playing favorites at all. This is Ginnungagap from Norse myth. This was a quick sketch I did for the formation of California. This is Seven Turtles, Turtle Island, really great story. A Nicenian story. So we tell the stories from here on the earth in fourth grade. There's a student of mine who's dressed up as Thor. She really enjoyed being Thor. And so we do all the arts. You know, right away, kids will identify, oh yeah, I really like theater and I'm not so good at painting. And we don't cater to that. Everybody does all of the arts all the time, all the way until the end of eighth grade. And by then they've identified, oh yeah, I'm not really into drawing, but I do it anyway. Oh, I'm not really into singing, but I do it anyway. It creates really well-rounded artists. And they go on to high school and they realize, even if they don't like drawing, they realize they take that drawing 101 class and they realize how far advanced they are in their design. Because I teach them design every year. Here's some paintings that they did, some watercolor paintings. I wish I had more examples of student work, but here's my Odin. This was a really, really big drawing. Took me a couple of hours to do. And then more science. You know, they learn about the planets and the zodiac and then some Greek stories they hear, Indian stories. I hope I'm not making you seasick by cruising through these fast. Botany. You know, these are some quick sketches I threw up to explain some things across several days, algae and mushrooms. They're then taking all of these things too and making their own textbook. So they have blank books and they open their main lesson book up and they've already done some writing to go with it. You know, they've told the story of the mushroom a little bit with my help. And we put the writing in and we make it beautiful. We use a border and then they do some drawings to go with it. And that's every day. Some algae. Stories from India. And I get to tell the story of Buddha and all the Hindu stories, which are amazing stories. This one is interesting. This actually shows the structure of fiction there. There's a mountainous line there that shows intro and character setting, introductions, conflicts, climax, falling action, rising action, all of that was something that we were talking about through those days while we were learning about Shiva and Ganesha. There's an Avalokiteshvara up on the board. And then we do Egypt. We get to study all these amazing motif, more geology. And then once they hit the upper grades, the stories shift. So about at the Roman era in sixth grade, the end of sixth grade, we switch from telling myth to telling biography. The stories then for sixth, seventh, and eighth graders all become biographies. And it really does happen around Julius Caesar. And then seventh grade's all about Renaissance and the biographies of the Renaissance. And eighth grade is the biographies of revolutions and revolt. I had all my students draw this. Then we do the biographies. This is a Caesar I did on the chalkboard. And then one I did in charcoal, because they also then they did it with pencil in their books, and they also did them with charcoal. There's my take at William Shakespeare, very powerful biography, and some of their work to follow along with it. And this was seventh grade. A little bit more. The school of philosophers is the detail of this drawing here, painting by Raphael. The sciences are handled phenomenologically. So we'll do a demonstration. I'll do a demonstration, and it will be pretty much silent, wordless, like, oh, I've got something I got to show you, and I set fire to something, and there's no discussion. That just like disappears. And then the next day I bring it back and I say, okay, what? Tell me what I did. Let's draw it. And they actually draw the demonstrations. This is a movie. I don't think it's going to play though. The other big thing is geometry in the upper grades. So, and this has become kind of my personal bent is I do a ton of sacred geometry, and we teach it to the children as well. And it's become kind of my personal fare. Here's some more technique, and then some student work. So the idea of them going on to be able to make meaning out of their own lives is very valuable to me. That's my goal. That's my mission. The other thing that really comes about through Waldorf is the idea that we don't want them to see so much media, really. At one point we said, okay, we're a media-free environment. We've had to kind of pull back on that because we can't just say, no, no media. It's like a guideline. But the students that I've had that never turn on the television, that don't watch movies, that don't participate in like mainstream culture media, they're the ones that end up being the most imaginative and creative further into their lives. So that's like one direct thing. Like if I as a teacher can preserve that for as long as possible, I do. I like them to stay dreamy for as long as possible. It's, engaging the pictorial consciousness. And Lama talks about that, the pictorial consciousness being super important. And I think we're just about at the end. This is another piece of student art. And then my dodecahedron there. Thank you for your attentiveness.
Beautiful.
I think I went a little over.
We're doing good.
Yeah.
So I'm Joe. Kim introduced me as a photographer in the previous millennium. I worked in Hollywood. And so that's where I got my film and photography background. But for the last 25 years, I've been an archaeologist in California. I've done a little work in Central America, but most of my professional work has been in California. And not always. I'm a professional archaeologist, so I do contract archaeology, which means I work a lot with federal and state agencies. I work with private developers. I work with the Forest Service, Caltrans, people like that. So a lot of the work doesn't feel like it's very beneficial to society, but occasionally, actually more than occasionally, I get to do a job that is. And so I want to show you guys a specific project that I worked on a few years ago that I think was a big benefit to a particular culture and show you. And hopefully this isn't too dry. We're going to get pretty geeky in the archaeology here. I'm going to get a little bit deep in the weeds. So if you can see this map, I don't know, does my cursor show up? Yeah, kind of. Not very well.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
It's like this because we want to see this one.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Anyway, California, obviously, if you look down north of Los Angeles, it says Vasquez Rocks in red. So that's the area that I'm going to talk about today. It's actually a natural area park, so it's a Los Angeles County public park. And this is what Vasquez Rocks looks like. It's in the Santa Clarita Valley. It's on the Santa Clara drainage. The whole park measures 932 acres. And what you see here is those things that look like mountains. Those are uplifted sandstone and conglomerate slabs, basically. That's not the entire park. The entire park is really the whole area you see in the picture, but that's the area specifically I'm going to be talking about today. Um, if you're a Star Trek fan, already know Vasquez Rocks intimately. It was in like 10 Star Trek episodes. It's a really popular location for filming because it's so close to Los Angeles. Here's another shot. If you're taking notes, that's a Gorn, Gorn, on the left. There's not many around anymore. This is, I think, and spoiler alert, Captain Kirk lived to fight another day after this. You'll have to find the episode yourself. Um, so this project, I was working with the Tataviam tribe, which is an existing tribe that's still down there. This is a picture from about 1915. The Tataviam in 1770, the population was about 3,500. By 1910, their population was down to about 150. And currently, they list their population as being about 900 people, although I think that's a little bit optimistic. I think they're closer to 500. Their language actually went extinct in 1916. So I'm going to get into some kind of deep in the weeds in linguistics in a minute because it's really important to us archaeologists. But understand that there's really any record that we have of their spoken language is stuff that was written basically back in the 1800s. The Tataviam people, it's important throughout my presentation to keep in mind that their cultural mindset is that this area is where where their people were born, where they were created, and where they've lived for eons. So they feel very connected to this landscape. And as far as they're concerned, Vasquez Rocks is sort of ground zero for their culture, even though they actually were settled further out from the park boundaries. But they see this area that I'm going to talk about as sort of being the birthplace of their entire culture, their entire civilization. Um, so I threatened you with linguistics. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. So this map is California as best we can reconstruct tribal boundaries at the time that the Spanish showed up. So late 1700s, basically. So what you're seeing here, the way as archaeologists and anthropologists, the way we define these culture areas is not really the tribal territories so much as the distribution of their languages. So what you're seeing here is over 80 distinct languages were spoken in California at the time the white folks showed up, basically. Um, so there were more languages spoken in California than in the rest of the United States combined. And actually, there were more people there were as many people in California living at the time of conquest as there were in the rest of the United States. So California was very densely populated and is a real mixing pot of cultures and languages, as you can see. So what's important to, my research in this particular project is the map that's on the upper right, where you see the colors. Those are language families, and that's the way we look at these languages, even though each culture, you know, these languages are so distinct that people 50 miles away from each other may not have been able to understand each other. These are really distinct language groups, but they fall into very broad families. And so the ones that I'm going to be talking about mostly are, if you see the green area, look at the map on the upper right, the green area that's sort of on the Nevada border there that pokes into Southern California. Those are Uto-Aztecan languages. So those languages actually formed in Mexico about 6,000 years ago and moved their way up in the United States, up into the Great Basin and the Southwest, and eventually filtered into California. The other language group that I want you to notice is in the purple, which those are the Chumash languages. So those are the ones that are sort of in that Santa Barbara, down by the Channel Islands there. That's actually the oldest language group in North America. That language group, we believe, dates back to the late Pleistocene. So the current thinking, you probably learned in high school in terms of the colonization of North America that folks came through Alaska and came down an ice-free corridor that was in the middle of the continent. That was sort of the conventional wisdom about 15, 20 years ago. Now we really believe that when people first came to America, they came down the coast. And those Chumash languages, very old language family, right on the coast like that, that's supporting evidence for that, as well as the Channel Islands, which are in that same area. Some of the oldest human remains that we found in North America are on the Channel Islands. So that's a lot of evidence that that's actually how folks came into the United States. So this will bear into the rest of my presentation, I promise. I'm not just dragging you through this for no reason. So this is Vasquez Rocks. Kind of hard to see on this picture, but if you see the yellow and black dotted boundary, that's the actual boundary of the park. So it's about 1,000 acres. The area that I'm going to be talking about is this inset that's on the left, which is what was called Agua Dulce Village. And there's actually 21 sites within that area. And that's the main ceremonial area for the Tataviam. And that's the area that we really studied during my project. Originally, well, let me get to the actual nuts and bolts of the project in a minute. In terms of Tataviam population, the population here was the highest during what we call the middle period, which is about 600 BC to about 1150 AD. And so this area that we're looking at and that I'm talking about at that point held about 200 or 300 people. That's about the maximum that this area held. At the time of contact, there were about 50 people living here. This is unusual for this part of the state in that it was a year-round village that these folks lived in. Typically, they would do seasonal villages. They would have a fairly big village in the winter or in the summer, surrounded by satellite villages, and they would move around during the year. The Tataviam at Vasquez Rocks are a little bit unique because they did have a year-round village, which is this Agua Dulce Village. The Tataviam lived in pit houses like this, so they would excavate a shallow pit, it would be about 2 feet deep, and then build this structure over the top of it. And they would live in it for a few months, and then it would get so full of vermin, essentially, that they would burn it down and build another one. So one of the things I want to stress here is that these are how people lived, and they sort of lived away from the rocks. They lived in open areas in these clusters of wickiups, of huts. The other component here, and the component that I studied, is these rock shelters, and there's 3 examples here. And these are actually not where anybody lived, but these, as near as we can tell, were little ceremonial centers. They were almost shrines. And these all have, not all of them, but a lot of them have rock art in them. And that was what my project was to really document and study the rock art. It's notable, and I said before that the population day to day lived in these wickiups away from the rock shelters. The rock art, with one notable exception that I'll show you in a minute, was really confined to these private spaces, which is sort of, opens up a lot of really interesting questions about the way they were using their space and the way that their art was, a lot of cultures, particularly in the early stages where art is developing, art is very controlled by a subset of the population, just like religion is. Religion is typically not openly shared with everyone. It's a way for a culture to develop a hierarchy, essentially. I mean, even look at us here. Lama has command of a level of information that is not available to the rest of us. And so you can think of this as sort of being analogous to that in a sense, is that there's art in these confined, closed spaces that was not accessible as far as we can tell to the rest of the population. So in these little shelters that have their art, there's no habitation debris, there's no evidence that they ate there, that they cooked there, that they slept there, that they did anything there except deal with the artwork, which, we're just inferring that this art that I'm going to show you was sacred. That's the Tataviam people that are still there today believe that it was sacred art. And so the way that they're sort of using the space within the overall park sort of supports that whole notion that the art is private and kept away from the general public. Yeah, I should say, so in terms of the project that I was doing, the art that the Tataviam people originally contracted the firm that I worked for in order to do a broad survey of the entire 1,000-acre park. But the real issue that they had was these areas that have rock art in them are both naturally deteriorating at a really fast rate due to erosion. So the art, and I'll show you some examples of this, the art is actually peeling off the rock walls of these caves, essentially, and falling to the ground. And the other problem they had was vandalism, because it is a public park. And Agua Dulce Village area that has the rock art is so big that they can't fence that off or any way protect it. So there were big issues with the public going in there and trashing the place, in some cases defacing the art or trying to steal it off the walls. And so the tribe wanted us to come in and basically do, they sort of saw the deterioration and the elimination of the art as being inevitable. They understood that the art is impermanent, right? And they understand that it's not going to last forever and it's going to go away. But they wanted to establish some baseline conditions for the art so that they could monitor its deterioration, and they could also monitor any man-made problems that happen, like vandalism. The park's solution to this for about 10 or 15 years was anytime a rattlesnake was found in a picnic area in one of the public areas on a hiking trail, they would grab the rattlesnake and relocate it to the Agua Dulce Village where all the rock art is. And then they put up signs all around saying, caution, stay out, rattlesnake area, which was only, wasn't entirely effective, but it meant that while we were doing this project, we were constantly just stepping over rattlesnakes. They're all over the place out there. So that was fun. And as far as I know, they're still dumping the rattlesnakes back there because, like I said, there's no way to fence this area off and protect it. Um, Among other things, there is a cemetery at the village. That's sort of one of the things that triggered this whole their need to protect everything. There's a cemetery there, and somebody brought a backhoe in the early 80s and dug the whole cemetery up in the middle of the night, spread bones and grave goods all over the place, and really destroyed the cemetery. But although some of the archaeological evidence that we know now about the Tataviam came from that cemetery because it had been dug up. All of a sudden, I'm not advancing here. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this real quick because linguistics, again, are going to factor into this. You can see Vasquez Rocks sort of in the middle of the map there north of Los Angeles. We've got Chumash on the left, which is that really early language family, the one that kind of dates to the late Pleistocene, oldest people probably in California. And then to the right, you see Kwaisu, the Serrano and Banyume. Those are the Uto-Aztecan languages that came in. Those came into the area probably about 4,000 years ago, is when they were established. And they came in from the Great Basin in the east. And right smack in the middle, we've got the Tataviam. And the Tataviam language is one of these Uto-Aztecan languages. So the language itself is associated with this migration that's coming in from the east. So here's some of the rock art. It's not quite what you would expect if you've never seen, particularly Southern California Native American rock art before. This is a motif that's on one of the rock shelters. This is actually a very Chumash looking rock art. It's Chumash rock art is painted. They actually would manufacture paint. So they would use pigment and a vehicle and a binder, and they would mix it together in order to create paint. They would apply it with brushes. It was applied wet, or they would apply it with fingertips. And Chumash rock art is almost always polychrome, so it's multiple colors. At Vasquez Rocks, it's almost always white, red, and black. There is Chumash rock art that's monochrome as well, but they do a lot of polychrome. And if you've ever had a chance to see some of the rock art that's in the Chumash area, it's absolutely amazing. Polychrome mandalas and abstract figures. It's pretty crazy. This is sort of a little snippet, a little nugget of Chumash style art. This is also Chumash style. As archaeologists, we sort of break art up into two broad categories, abstract and representational. Um, Representational, of course, would be people, animals, trees, stuff like that, where they're actually reproducing something that exists in nature. Chumash rock art has a lot of representational elements to it. So you can see this is what we call an anthropomorph, otherwise known as a human being. On the left, kind of deteriorated, but you can make it out. You'll notice that this human being has fingers and toes, which is a very Chumash motif. Doesn't show up in a lot of other cultures, surprisingly, in California, but the Chumash, the anthropomorphs, often have fingers and toes. Digitate anthropomorphs is what anthropologists call it, which is a ugly word to just say they got fingers. Right? Um, this is also Chumashan, and one of the things that I did, and I was lucky enough to have a photography background, but I did a lot of digital enhancement of photographs. I did infrared photography on some of these rock shelters. I did ultraviolet photography, ultraviolet fluorescence photography, where you have to darken out the whole shelter and bombard the elements with ultraviolet light until they glow back and fluoresce, and then you photograph that. We did chemical composition on the pigments, both on a mass spectrometer and on a portable X-ray fluorescence device that we could actually do compositional calculations within the rock shelters themselves. So we had a whole suite of techniques that we sort of threw at it to try to look at this rock art. But this is the way the panel would look to the eye. And then this is an enhanced version of it. So you can see when we start bringing the enhancement in, a lot of stuff starts getting uncovered. But this, in short, this is another Chumash style panel. You can see there's two anthropomorphs. They're hard to make out, but you kind of get used to seeing these things. On the left side of the frame, the taller things that have got horns or a split head, that's very Chumash. So are these ticks that run along the bottom. We call those centipedes. I don't know if they're actually centipedes, but that's just what we term them. Very Chumash element here. Again, this stuff, for the most part, is all painted with a brush, and it's using manufactured paint, right? Here's another Chumash one, another centipede, basically, and you can see the enhanced version on the right. What I love about this is that's actually a handprint, a palm print that you see on the far right there. You can really make it out on the enhanced version. Yeah, we're kind of blocked here. We can't see that, but what's really cool is you can actually see fingerprints in this, right? I mean, that's how good the paint preservation in that particular panel is. As you'll see, some of the preservation is better and some's worse on some of these. This one is actually preserved pretty well. Now, there's a second style of rock art here as well, which comes from the Great Basin, and it's a style that we would normally associate with Shoshonean and Paiute tribes. So we would associate it with people that spoke the Uto-Aztecan language family that came in later from the east. Their stuff is not painted. They would actually apply with a stick of pigment, like a crayon, directly to the wall. Almost no representational at all. Very, very simple human figures, anthropomorphs, which would be stick figures, if they show up at all. But the Uto-Aztecan style, or this sort of Shoshonean style, tends to be abstracts, rhythmic elements. If you can see, there are some things in the center of the black and white on the right. There's sort of a sundial looking thing that's all made up of ticks. Way up in the upper right corner, there's a thing that almost looks like a rug that's a shape up there. They only show up in the enhanced version. But all of this has been done literally by drawing onto the rock with a crayon, basically. And that stuff is not preserving very well at all because it doesn't have any binder to make it stick to the rock. So that's much more susceptible to erosion than the Chumashan style art. Here's another, this is an interesting panel because it's got a Chumashan, two painted areas. It's that thing that looks like a sunburst or star in the center. And that larger red blob to the left, the lower left corner, the rest of it is the Shoshonean, is the Uto-Aztecan style. So it's got the stick figures, it's painted with the crayon, or not painted, but drawn on with the crayon, whereas the Chumash stuff has been painted and actually uses paints. What's interesting about this, and unfortunately I can't zoom in on the picture, is that the Chumash elements have been defaced with very fine scratches. You can just a little bit make it out in the left one, but I'll show you better examples of this in a minute. The scratches don't affect the Shoshonean elements. They don't affect the Great Basin style stuff. They just affect the Chumash and style stuff. So it's actually been defaced, vandalized. And we know from photographs going back to almost the turn of the century that this is not historic era vandalism. This is stuff that happened, that was done by Aboriginal populations. This panel really sort of shows the best example of that. Now, this is interesting because this is the one public panel in the whole park. I talked about these being sacred spaces where the public did not necessarily have access to this art. This is the one panel where the public did have access to it. It's about probably the size of one of these wall panels here, maybe even a little bit bigger than that if you look at the whole thing together. It's vertical. It faces the village where everybody lived. So this is very much a public art here. So what this is a layer of painted, again, manufactured paints like the Chumash would do, applied probably with fingers or a brush, substrate underneath. And then the top of it, the entire thing has been covered with a network of these scratches. So they took a piece of hard rock and literally cut through. Essentially, we think they probably defaced this original Chumash artwork that was in there. This will show you an even better example of that. If you look at this too, you can see some of the, if you look over to the far right, this is some of the natural deterioration where I was talking about. These rock faces, because of the type of rock they are, they're actually delaminating and they're spalling. So big chunks of them are falling off. And the more water they get exposed to, probably climate change is exacerbating this, but it's making these things deteriorate quicker and quicker. Some of the pigment we were able to analyze in the lab actually came from parts that had fallen off the rock wall, so we could take them back to the lab and do analysis on the pigment. This is an enhanced version of the same photo. So going back to this, you see it looks like this sort of nebulous wash of pigment that's got a lot of scratching over the top of it. But when we enhance it, we see that there are Chumash type elements underneath the scratches, painted, finger painted, using a brush, wet paint application. There's some Shoshonean elements here too. You can see kind of up in the center, it almost looks like a Star of David. That was painted on with a crayon. But there was definitely this whole substrate of earlier Chumash art. And then it was literally almost violently defaced. When you see it, it's pretty shocking the way they systematically just cut the whole thing up and incised it all with fine lines. And this is actually not the first time we've seen this. There are rock art sites that are out in the Mojave Desert that have exactly the same thing going on. There's a really notable one that I studied that's on China Lake Naval Base that's out by Ridgecrest, where exactly the same thing happened. There was a population of actually Kauai Sioux, which is a tribe that lives north of the Tataviam, that has very similar style to the Chumash. And in China Lake, we see this background of Kauai Sioux art that was, again, really violently defaced by Shoshonean style rock art, essentially. One more example here. This one is just notable because you can see a lot of the natural deterioration that's happening on this panel. And then again, we've got sort of this combination of Chumash and Great Basin style rock art. The Great Basin style, when the two styles intersects, the Great Basin style almost always superimposes over the top of the Chumash style. One more example here. This one doesn't involve scratching, but it involves basically a Chumash-style sunflower, if you want, or maybe that's a human. Nobody knows for sure, as well as some other painted elements. And they've been covered over the top with, that's not charcoal, it's actually hematite. It was a black hematite crayon that they went over the top with. So again, that was artwork that was defaced. Um, I'll get to that in a minute. That's a question I've got. So basically, the punchline of all of it is that, if you recall, I said that the Tataviam feel that as a culture, they were born and have lived for their entire existence at Vasquez Rocks. And when we start looking at the archaeological evidence, including the rock art, we also look at things like the way the cemetery was structured, the way the artifacts appear above and below each other when we excavate. We can tell that originally this area was actually inhabited by people that were probably associated with the Chumash. And then about 4,000 years ago, when the Uto-Aztecan population came in, they took the place over, essentially. We don't have any evidence that it was a violent takeover, but it's possible that it was. And given the way that this rock art was defaced, it sort of implies that there maybe was some bad blood between the two groups at that point. But California is all about population replacement. And, that early map that I showed you of linguistic boundaries, I mean, that is a snapshot in time. And if you were to roll that map back 1,000 years, those colors would be in completely different places and completely different shapes. So from an archaeological standpoint, it makes California really a really complicated but really cool area to work in, because there is so much variety, and so much of what we do as archaeologists is need to interpret what group are we actually looking at when we're looking at material remains of something. I mentioned the cemetery. One of the things that sort of is supporting evidence for my thesis here is that the cemetery was burials up until about the last 3 or 4 feet, and at that point goes to cremations. The burials essentially end, and they're capped with a layer of cremated remains. Chumash buried their dead. The Uto-Aztecan populations coming in from the east, they cremated. So that's another supporting line of evidence. So as archaeologists, this is what we do, is we try to get 5 or 6 different lines of evidence, all aim them at the same question, because any single one of these sets of evidence is not going to provide a conclusive a conclusion by itself. But when you combine them, you start to see these patterns. So what's all this got to do with Dharma, right? I guess my point is that this was a really successful project from my perspective. We gave the Tataviam people just what they wanted. They wanted a set of baseline conditions for their ceremonial area. So we were able to do a really complete, I'm talking about thousands of images documenting every square inch of these rock shelters in high resolution digital, as well as all the other techniques that I mentioned, and really gave them a baseline set of conditions, as well as just nice recording of this that they can use to teach their children, they can use for public presentations and everything else. So this was one of those projects that it was a feel-good project by the end of it, because we really felt like we accomplished something and really were a benefit to this really marginalized group of people, frankly. So my last slide, and this is just a question that has always intrigued me. So this is Lascaux, right? So this is Middle Paleolithic, actually almost Upper Paleolithic. So this is about 20,000 years ago. Rock art that's in the caves at Lascaux. The people who lived at Lascaux, you could stand them next to the people that lived at Vasquez Rocks and almost not tell the difference. I mean, you could tell the difference physically in their features, but in terms of the way they dressed, their material culture, their technology, their economy, the way they foraged food, their social structure was almost identical to the people that lived at Vasquez Rocks during the period when the art was made that I showed you. You've got to go back 60,000 years in Europe to get rock art that is, quote, as primitive as the stuff that I showed you at Vasquez Rocks. And one of the things that's always intrigued me is is why is the European rock art, the Paleolithic rock art tradition, so much more advanced? And I use finger quotes to this because, we bring our Western sensibility to this stuff when we look at it. We really bring a sense of Western bias and what we think is good art versus what we think is bad art. And I personally, my first glance is the Lascaux stuff looks like good art. And the Vasquez Rocks stuff looks like what my daughter used to draw on the living room wall with a crayon, basically. I mean, that's essentially what it looks like, at least to our Western eyes. And I'm very interested in how this difference comes up. How do we tie art to consciousness? And what's really the difference? What are the differences in sort of the day-to-day consciousness of these groups that would cause such a different expression in their artwork, you know? So I just food for thought. I don't have any answers to that. I don't know how to answer those questions. Everybody, when you do rock art research, the standard question out of people's mouths is, what does it mean? And honestly, we don't try to ask those questions because there is no way. I mean, I can come up with hypotheses for what these things mean, but that if you can't falsify those hypotheses, then there's no scientific validity to putting those forward. So I can say, even when I say, oh, that's a sacred space with sacred art, well, that's an inference I'm making. We can't go back 4,000 years and talk to these people and actually find out from them that this was a sacred space and this is what these motifs meant. We're just sort of, we're just going there because it kind of makes sense given the preponderance of evidence that we find archaeologically. Anyway, that's my overarching question about all this is, why is European stuff so like this and California stuff is so like that? Anyway, thank you for listening.
Really happy to. Anybody have any questions?
I have a suggestion.
Yep.
So the European cave art, that's the whole novel. The
Vasquez Rocks. Yeah.
Is shorthand. They're telling us it's communication more than art.
That could be. And that's an interesting thing to bring up because I did another study that was actually out of China Lake where I was talking about before, and there you see very simple geometric designs, but they're in public settings, and they seem to mark out territory because out there you had different cultural groups, often in competition with each other, that would share territory, or they'd have territory that would bump right up to each other. And so one of my theories was that they did this art as markers, basically to say, stay out of here, you're entering my territory, and that kind of thing. But the fact that the Vasquez stuff, and this for that matter, is not easily visible to the public, sort of makes me wonder, why would you do a shorthand like, well, maybe you would. I don't know. That's an interesting take on it. But then why is there no longhand version too? That's the other.
Doing that 20,000 years earlier.
Maybe. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think, Doug, did you have your hand up? I think he's the first one. You're gonna have to speak up, Doug.
Oh, yeah, I was waiting for the.
Yeah.
No, we
No mic.
don't have that.
Oh, no, Mike. Oh, we don't have mics today.
Got to yell
You're
today.
gonna have to use your teacher voice.
Probably shamans, religious people. That's the best of our knowledge would be that. Yeah. But again, how can we ever know for sure? I mean,
Maybe children did it.
yeah. It's interesting too that the Tataviam themselves there's no cultural memory of that art being produced. So when you show them a particular element or a particular motif and ask, what does that mean? They don't have an answer. They're just like, well, that's before my time. I don't know, or I wasn't taught, or something like that. So we don't even have an institutional memory to fall back on in terms of how to interpret some of this stuff. No.
So you first and then you next, huh?
Yeah, so I'm independent, but my thinking was probably like, especially if it was non-public area, that it might have been young people of the tribe running off, and trying out new art styles, which would also counter for the defacing, because young people typically can't handle their emotions if there was conflict within the tribe.
That's a very interesting take on it. Yeah, that hadn't occurred to me.
Especially if you're like the thinking of the shaman and stuff like that, there would be like a cultural story or a memory to go with like the motifs and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
if it was just young people doing young people stuff and like trying new art styles or graffitiing or just running off into a non-public area, then that would probably do a lot of extension on the simplicity as well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's actually would be a really interesting thing to test. I mean, all of these theories could be tested if we could go into some of these rock shelters and actually excavate, which the Tataviam won't allow us to do.
Yeah.
Because all of these little caves, they're gradually filling up with silt naturally over the course of hundreds and thousands of years. So if you imagine each one of these rock shelters gets an eighth inch of silt in it a year, think of how quickly that's going to build up over the course of a few hundred years. So we're convinced that there's more art below the surface of the ground that we can't see, but also to get down to sort of the area that was open when the art was created, we have not had an ability to get down there yet. So if we could, that might answer some of those questions like that. You know, it would be really interesting. Hopefully someday we will, but they don't want us to get in there and start digging, understandably.
So I'd like to start a question real quick. Do you happen to know what pigments are used for? My guess is like a red ochre of some kind.
Yeah, it's an ochre. So it's usually it's ochre, which is hematite, so it's iron oxide. And they would heat treat it to get different shades. So that's, it's almost universally that. Although I'm trying to recall because it was a few years ago, I believe the white pigments were gypsum, but the black and the red are hematite. Yeah. And one of them is, I forget which is which. I think one of them was heat fired. I think that's how you get the red color out of
I
it.
think that's.
Yeah, and then the other is just out of the ground, hematite. But they would grind it up and mix it with usually egg yolk or blood as a binder to make it stick to the wall. And then they'd mix it with water as well as a vehicle to make it runny and paint it on. So there was a whole technology going with it.
So it's kind of like egg tempera.
Yeah.
Any other questions on the floor?
I'm sorry, I have one more thing about
Mhm.
I'm an artist as well, and to me, when I look at those the pieces that are the pieces on the rocks formation and versus the pieces on that wall right there, to me, it strikes me as like the difference between abstraction and representation. Like for some artists, like me, for example, representation comes very easily, and abstraction,
Yeah.
which can carry a lot more meaning, it's a different frame of mind for different purposes. And that's my opinion. It's in
Yeah.
some ways it's like I can draw what I see, and that's its underlying meaning, but to see what some of the stars and the little scratches mean,
Yeah.
that to me has.
I think
deeper.
my thought of it too is when there's like these individuals within these groups, and there may be an individual that just really, like you say, like that realism, it's just like makes sense to them.
Yeah.
And if it's appreciated by the people around them, then it gets passed on, or somebody comes in from another village that has that and people go, oh, that's cool, let's try that. And so it could just be the difference between what individuals were at a certain place at a certain time, even like that. Are there any questions from the Zoom?
And could we hear them if there were?
Yeah, I know, right.
Yeah.
Well, sorry. Nothing? Okay. All right.
I was just gonna ask what Waldorf you work at.
Golden Valley Charter School?
Golden Valley Charter School?
Yeah, that's in Orangevale.
On Orangeville. Okay. Yeah, because I was looking around for schools when my son gets a little older.
Yeah, it's a great school.
I know, I want to go there now.
I know.
It's like, damn.
Elementary.
Well, I wish Zach had been my teacher
You
too.
know, right?
You're like, give us all the teacher experience.
Yeah, Doug, you have another question?
I just had one question, maybe you know, when did art evolve from being spiritual or other things to just being done for the sake of art alone?
Yeah. Well, artists didn't even put their name on their art for centuries. And during the Greek time, the classical Greek time, artists started becoming famous. And so names were affiliated with the name. So at that point, if you were in more like an advanced cultural center, you might be singled out and your name attributed, your work attributed to your name. But if you were in a more rural area, that might not happen, but over time, that's just become more acceptable. Now we divide things into craft and into art, fine art. So fine art usually has a name affiliated with it. Craft may or may not have an affiliation name with it. So it's kind of like that.
We got one question from Zoom that we'll read out to you. Ellen says, I'd like to know how they balance their time and energy between their projects and their other Dharma practice and training.
Right.
That's hard. For some of you.
Projects going on.
Mine is my husband doesn't get any of my attention. But yeah, you know what? I mean, you just have to it's like at any given moment, I take a look at my time and it's like, what can I actually do now? And so like with the school project, we just have these meetings that pop up. Sometimes we have scheduled meetings, but we also have meetings that are like putting out fires and things like that. And so you just have to say yes as much as you can, if you want it to happen. And I have my Dharma practice, which is like at least 3 hours a day is Dharma practice, plus classes and stuff here. And then the school thing is probably, I don't know, it's probably like 6 hours a week, or it might be more than that. And then I have a building that I own that I have to keep it from falling down. So that takes some time. And then there's the things like just eating well and getting enough sleep and doing exercise and stuff. So you stay alive longer. So you can get it all done. But I don't know, it's just a balance. See, I don't have I'm semi-retired, whatever that means. I work more now than ever, but so I don't have that. And I don't have children either. I take care of other people's children and people, but I don't have my own children. I think that's a huge advantage for getting all this other stuff done, honestly. You guys?
I don't know how I balance it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. Being a school teacher is very good Dharma practice. So there's lots of places where things fit together really well. Practicing patience and then my personal artwork probably is probably the last thing that I can find time for.
Yeah, who said we balance it?
Yeah, I know, right?
Oh, for me, I just gradually get up earlier and earlier and earlier to try to make everything fit in. No, I'm like Zachary. I think my personal photography is sort of, I put it on the back burner and I turn to it because it helps me stay sane and it helps me sort of,
Yeah.
vent off some stuff that I shouldn't have inside my head. That's a big
Right.
value to me. So, but yeah, I would love, I'm in the process of trying to simplify my life so that I can, put more focus on, I'm really trying to make my practice the top priority at this stage of my life. Second would be work and third would be my own personal artwork. Yeah, but it's a struggle. Yeah, it's not easy.
For a long time, for the last 2 years, I've made very little art until just the last couple of months because I was so busy and I was changing as a person so quickly from my Dharma practice. I didn't really know what in the heck to paint or how to paint it. And so really it's just recently I've had a breakthrough, and you saw that piece that was like the moon with the dorje on it. that I thought, oh yeah, okay. So I did. So once I found some way to express myself, I've just made more time for that, and other things have fallen away, and I've had to say no to other things, to make room for it. So, wow, thanks so much. I've really enjoyed doing this, and
Yeah,
thanks for all
hanging
showing up.
around.
This is a great crowd for a Friday after the party when it's raining out. It's really a good, yeah. And you sat through it all with the weird sound and stuff. Yeah. Thanks.
Dedication?
Yeah. Thank you.
Due to the merits of these virtuous actions may quickly attain the state of a
Guru
true
Buddha
Buddha
and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more.
millennia
By snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All powerful Chenrezig, Tenzin, please remain until samsara ends. May the teachings of the Buddha flourish, and the followers of the teaching remain forever. May all migrators achieve happiness, and may they fulfill all their temporary and ultimate goals. Losang, magical display the deep awareness of all the victorious ones. Merciful giver of a stream of profound, vast instructions to the fortunate migrators. Please remain always unperishing, unchanging, unfading.
Avalokiteshvara, great treasure of objectless perfection.
Manjushri, master of flawless wisdom. Vajrapani, destroyer of the entire host of Mars. Tsongkhapa, crown jewel of the snowy land sages. Losang Drapa, I make request at your holy feet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda.